This is a channel where I am documenting my journey to a simpler life by trying to find a philosophy that is both simple to understand and simple to execute, that will also hopefully lead me to a simpler lifestyle that is more productive. Just make sure that you like, share, subscribe, do the things that you need to do to make the YouTube algorithm gods definitely feel like they're more appeased. Everything a little bit helps, and so I appreciate all of it. Today, this is more a documentation of my personal journey. I'm kind of documenting these in a vlog format because I want to be able a year from now to watch this video and say, okay, how far have I come from where I was? And it's very much a documentation of my own personal struggles. And so, if that's not your thing, that's fine. If it is, maybe my story can help you a little bit farther, because as a lot of you know, I used to run another channel called The Rabid Atheist, and I felt like that channel was more dealing with the past, and now I'm trying to bridge into the future. I'm trying to get past the deconversion and get to the reconstruction of who I am and finding out who I am. And so I never really, in my opinion, had that opportunity. I always let religion do that for me. And now kind of exploring myself a little bit and trying to discover a lot of things about myself. And today, I want to specifically document some results from the therapy session that I had yesterday with my therapist. I meet with her probably every other Wednesday via the internet. She's way down in the southern part of Michigan, and I'm up here, so we use the miracle of technology to have sessions, and she's been very good. I learned of her through the Clergy Project, so it's been a long-term relationship. The only time we've not seen each other is when I was in Texas, and that was much to my detriment. I needed to find a way to make sure that we were still communicating. But yesterday, during a session, I had a bit of a breakthrough, and I want to kind of document that a little bit. I have to give you a little backstory about me, and I'm calling this the Dragon of Sadness because it's a term I used to describe what was going on. And kind of the moment I began to picture it in my head, the moment the breakthrough kind of came for me. And if you go back to 1993, I had just graduated from Trinity Bible College. I was on my first steps. I knew that I was going to go to seminary because I still had questions that I wanted answered, and I still felt that more being a professor of Bible was more my calling at that time. And so as I graduated, I came off the platform, and they said all the final evocations and all that crap. And the graduation is basically over, and I'm kind of milling around with my friends from college. I graduated with a class of like 56. There weren't very many of us. It was like a small high school graduation, really, in a lot of respects, except they were handing out advanced degrees instead, and they were fully accredited. And my dad and mother had come from Michigan to North Dakota. And my father comes up to me, says no words, and just crushes me in this massive bear hug of his for like 10 seconds in front of God and everybody. And I put my arms around him, hug him back, very close to my father. And all he said over and over was, "I'm proud of you, son. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you." And that probably was a high moment in my life for me. I had, looking back at it, I really wish it had been something like engineering or something else, but I wish the subject had been different. But I think the pride would have still been there regardless of what degree I had gotten. And it was a real high mark for me and my father, because after that, me and Dad got along famously. It was even better than before. I could talk to him about anything, and he was really my counterbalance. And probably looking back at it, maybe, just maybe, he recognized a little bit of himself in me, because he suffered with dyslexia, and we didn't find out about it until he was older, in his 40s, because back when he went to school, it wasn't a thing. It wasn't a thing. And when I went to school, autism wasn't a thing. Okay, and now I'm being diagnosed possibly with it as an adult. And I think he kind of understood that I was a different kid, and he had a far better instinct about it. But after that moment, I just felt that our relationship went to a whole new level. And I went off to seminary, got my first year done. In the beginning of my second year, I lived a lot of different places. For the first semester, I was in a duplex with my family, but we couldn't really afford it. And so I was in a dorm at the time, staying there as a married student, driving home every other weekend from Kentucky. And all of a sudden, I get a phone call, and it's my mother actually, telling me that my father was in the hospital. He had suffered some sort of massive heart attack, stroke, something. So I'm hanging by the phone. It's back before smartphones were really a thing. And phone rings again a while later, and my mother tells me my father's dead. And I go home. I did the funeral. We went to the graveside. I've got my little kids. I got my daughter, who's 1, and at the time, and my 2 boys that are 4 and 3, and just an overwhelming sadness hit me. And I finished up my year at seminary. I finished the classes, but I had an awful time with it after that. And then I had a further awful time getting my thesis written. It took me like a year and a half to write my thesis. And it was this overwhelming sadness for the next 2 years, which I'm now going to dub the Dragon of Sadness. It had me captive. And I slipped into a very deep depression. And after I finished seminary and I graduated, and I was still there for about another year, and I couldn't shake it. Just this overwhelming sense of grief. And when I finally did come out of it, it was a combination of factors. I realized that I needed to do something. Knowing what I know now, I think my nervous system, if I'm indeed autistic, my autistic nervous system, my nervous system that is wired up a little bit different than everybody else, was just too overwhelmed by the sadness. Because intellectually, I could say, I got to get out of this. I got to get going. I have a whole bunch of people, riding on me and telling me to get out of it. But I was like, couldn't hold a job for very long. Couldn't do much of anything. About the only bright spot in my life, and this is honest truth, was sitting down in front of the TV and watching Babylon 5. That's why that series still has a soft place in my heart, because it was what kind of got me through. It was a new thing back then, and I was just like, I'm absolutely fascinated by science fiction in any way, and I'm just watching this thing and I'm getting through it. And every time I watch Babylon 5, it kind of brings up the memories of my father and the sadness too, and so I kind of shy away. I don't watch it very often, and I try to watch it for the good stuff. But I'm in therapy the other day, yesterday, and we're talking about sadness, and we're talking about how I don't process it very well, because what I do is what we do. I feel sad. I don't really notice it at first. 5 or 10 minutes later, I noticed that I was sad. I'm not as sad as I was, and all of a sudden I make a beeline to try to get away from that as quickly as possible and have some sort of positive experience. I go to the gym. And in my mind, I think I'm coping, but what I'm really doing is I'm running away from the sadness. I'm running away from the dragon. And that's not a very good thing for a warrior to do. I've talked about courage just very recently, and I suddenly realized at that moment that I really wasn't facing my fear of sadness. In fact, whenever sadness comes up, whenever I start to feel sad, I try to find some way to get away from it as quickly as possible. I always keep running from it. And my therapist was very wise to point out that doesn't really deal with the sadness. It just kind of keeps delaying it. And I've been doing this now for decades. Okay, it's an ingrained habit. I don't want to go back to that very deep, depressive sadness that I had for 2 or 3 years there after my father's death. I just don't want to go back to that. I wasn't a very good father, certainly wasn't a very good husband at the time. I wasn't a good Christian. I wasn't good at anything. Okay, all I was meat taking up a space. And I don't want to go back there. It's such a negative memory for me that sadness is so connected to it that I just don't want to go back there. And so the breakthrough came yesterday when I realized this is not a very effective way. This is probably why I still have these problematic moments, is because I don't deal with the sadness. Mentally, I push it aside somewhere, or I run from it, or I get away from it. But my nervous system, my actual physical nervous system, is still feeling it. And this can trigger, this is why I'm trying to learn how to express my emotions a little bit better. And with me and my therapist's relationship had a real breakthrough yesterday too, because I suddenly realized I really trusted her enough to tell her what I was really feeling. And the fact is, I'm just straight up afraid to face the dragon of sadness. I'm afraid to turn and face that bastard. I usually have just walked through it, try to get away from it, walk away from it, but I don't deal with it. I don't actually face it with courage and deal with it, and I realize that needs to stop. And I really need, instead of running from it, and I've been conditioned to run, I've conditioned myself to just make a beeline away. I need to change it, that when I realize I felt sad and I kind of start coming out of it, I'm like, no, wait a minute, let's turn around here. What the hell started this in the first place? And how can I express that? And what does this feel like? And a large part of my sadness these days is conditioned with the fact that I feel very alone. It's a deconversion issue too, because the one thing I haven't had now in 5 years in any sense of community at all. The fact is, church and religion do a really damn good job at community. They really do. It's why they survive. If they didn't do a good job at community, I think a lot of religions would die. Okay, because they're ridiculous. But because people bond around that, they survive. And I haven't had a companion now in my life for, it'll be 2 years in September pretty much. And I feel like that same feeling like I had after my father died, because I felt like I was so alone after Dad's death. And I wasn't, but I felt that way. And I realized I was making a connection with the feeling between being alone and sadness, being sad, and the dragon of sadness. And I told my therapist I'm straight up afraid, because I don't know if by myself, being alone, I can beat this thing. That it may take me rebuilding some sort of community in my life. I don't know, maybe this YouTube channel is an attempt at that. But it's even a YouTube channel, though, is not the same as going to church every day and having somebody, hey man, how you doing, shaking your hand, hugging your neck, and all that stuff. It's not the same. And, since my divorce, not having a companion has really intensified that feeling of loneliness. I miss being married, but I don't miss who I was married to. And I know that sounds awful, but it's like I miss the aspects of having somebody in your life that's there every day and that you can ask for help from when you really need it, and you can hug and be intimate with, and all those things that married couples do. I miss that part of it. I don't miss a lot of the other dysfunctional crap that the two of us went through, and a large part of it is my fault, and a large part of it's hers. Whenever I see a divorce, I don't think it's one side or the other. There's always, both sides have failed in some way to communicate or get something across, and I am lousy at communicating my emotions. And I won't talk about what my ex's level is. That's unfair to her, but it's for me now, that loneliness, I'm beginning to realize that my sadness is connected to that feeling of being alone. And the negative feeling of being alone. I don't mind the feeling of independence sometimes. I don't mind the feeling of being self-reliant and standing on my own 2 feet. Those are virtues that I follow. But I do mind feeling alone sometimes, like I have no fellowship, like I have no companionship. And I have a good friend, and if Jeff, if you're watching this, our friendship when we're together has that element, but we're both busy men and we just don't see each other very often anymore because we have 2 very different lives now. But we're still friends, and you'll always be there. But the day-to-day, the once or twice a week meeting with a community, that's all gone for me now. And atheists in general are really lousy at a sense of community. And so I'm kind of at this point where I realize, okay, my sadness reminds me of the time I felt so alone after my father's death. I remember my kids asked about that. I said, well, you're an only child. That must have been great. I said, no, because there's one thing I really wish I'd had a brother or sister for, because when my father died, I was the only one who understood how I felt, and the only one that could. And I felt so alone after that. And now every time I feel alone, I feel like I'm going to go back to that 2 or 3 years of being in the absolute pit of despair. And I don't want to do that. So instead of facing the sadness and wrestling with it, maybe pulling out a sword and fighting it, I run from it. Because it's better to get away from that, because I don't want to be pulled back into that. And I need to turn around and face it. But I've now come to the painful conclusion that I also need a community to help me do that. And I probably need a companion again to help me do that. That I can fight that battle, but I'm going to lose it a lot without those 2 things. And so that's kind of where I'm heading with this. And I just wanted to document this. I don't really know where I'm going to go from here. But I wanted to get that down and document it so that maybe a year from now when I look at it, I'll go, yeah, that's what I was facing. That's what I was dealing with. And now maybe I can look back a year and go, yeah, I've come a long way in the year. And so thank you for hanging around and listening to that. It's not my standard video for this channel, but I do want to document my personal journey into the simple life and following the simple life philosophy, because it's more than just finding a simple life. It's dealing with the past effectively so it doesn't affect my future or my present. And so I'm still on that journey. So thank you for coming along with me if you listened to this whole thing up to this point. Make sure you like, share the video. Anything you do helps. I appreciate every bit of it. And this has been Simple Life Philosophy with your host, Ed Raby. And, I'm wishing you to find a way through to have victory over your own dragon of sadness. Learn to face him. And if you need help, don't be afraid to ask for it. Thank you once again, and have a great day.